I've long thought that if we ever finally do get to the end of the corona story, as in where it came from and who's responsible for it, it will be that we paid the people who made it to completely upend society and alter several years of our lives for the worse. It will be that we subsidized our abusers. We sent our money to China to create this chaos so that those responsible could use it for their own political ends or for their own personal enrichment. It sounds like a bad movie plot, but several pieces of that scenario are well established at this point, of course. And it makes sense this evil plot would be outsourced, both for the purposes of concealing that evil and plausible deniability, but just to keep costs down too. If you actually are Dr. Evil creating a bioweapon, why would you deal with US regulators and oversight and labor costs when, just like everything else, you can hire out some standard-free Chinese warehouse to do it much more cheaply? But it turns out even that thinking, as much as many would call it overly conspiratorial, may actually be overly naive with what's actually going on. What if some of that biological development work wasn't done overseas, actually? What if it was done right here at home, just outside of plain sight? Now, of course, there are several leaps and dots to connect to say that is what's happening here, but with a story this mysterious and ominous, someone's got to fill in the gaps. Someone's got to answer the question, why are the Chinese doing unauthorized COVID experiments at a shady, illegal warehouse biolab right down the street? Health officials in California are describing it as a biological house of horror. This particular piece of local coverage calls it a biometh lab, a mess of half-functional equipment, hacked utilities, biologically engineered dead animals, human tissue and fluid samples, vials of disease, and more grotesque findings, some of which they don't even know what they are, all at the direction of a largely untraceable Chinese operation.
An investigation tonight into a possible illegal medical lab. Inside, mice bioengineered to incubate the COVID-19 virus. 30 refrigerators and freezers, some broken, were found filled with bodily fluids. Health officials tell us they are shocked at the biological house of horror.
This was happening in a warehouse in Reedley, California, about 25 miles southeast of Fresno. If it's not clear in that reporting, this was not an authorized biomedical research lab. It lacked any sort of certification or licensure. It wasn't even publicly known to be in operation. That warehouse in which it was operating was believed to be just a storage facility. And the way this operation was uncovered is pretty ironic, or perhaps it's perfectly appropriate depending on how you look at it, but apparently California's burdensome, insane, strict regulatory environment finally paid off, because this place wasn't busted up by some whistleblower who reported an illegal house of medical horrors. Nobody saw some pee or some blood leaking out and called it in. This lab was discovered because of an unauthorized garden hose on the building exterior.
The discovery was made after a local code enforcement officer noticed this garden hose poking out a back wall of the building.
Frankly, we knew that shouldn't be there. And when she went to go investigate, she found that there was activity or operation or something happening within that building.
Blind squirrel meets nut, I guess. Or in this case, Blind Squirrel is horrified to find hundreds of his rodent friends dead inside, and hundreds more suffering, hoping for death.
There was a special room that was built housing about 1,000 mice.
200 of the nearly 1,000 mice were already dead. According to court documents, all the rodents were being caged in, quote, inhumane conditions.
These mice were reportedly bioengineered to catch and carry the COVID-19 virus, samples of which were present in the building, and the mice were being tested with them. But to say this place was just a COVID testing operation would be incomplete. Beyond the mice and the Rona, this place was a nightmare's cornucopia of human samples and viruses and diseases.
Also found thousands of vials, many of which contain biohazards, materials including human blood, unidentified tissue, and other unknown substances.
A lot of these are being classified under unknown chemicals. Labels had been removed from bottles, so there was only certain testing we could do to those chemicals.
At least 20 potentially infectious, viral, bacterial, and parasitic agents were being stored inadequately, including E. coli, malaria, and even COVID.
And even that coverage is glossing over a few of the more significant hazards. Add HIV and herpes to the list of infectables too. Of course, COVID was a major function of this lab, though. The operation was apparently producing COVID test kits through its research. So sure, these test kits might give you AIDS, but remember, this is COVID that we're talking about. So if you have to sacrifice your business, so be it. If you have to sacrifice your kids' education, so be it. And yeah, if you have to get a little AIDS, so be it. We're all in this together. But what was all that Chinese talk? This mice-abusing freak show is housing COVID and testing COVID and making COVID tests. And COVID itself is of Chinese origin, sure, but what is the specific Chinese connection with this lab? The investigation has discovered this is an operation of Prestige Biotech, a company registered in Nevada but unlicensed for any business in California. Prestige Biotech's president is a man named Zhuquin Yao. At least that's my best attempt at pronouncing it. And of course, Mr. Yao has a fairly obvious nationality, but it's not just that. The warehouse was filled with thousands of boxes with Chinese shipping labels. Prestige Biotech lacked any permits necessary for storing and importing these chemicals from outside the United States, and it appears they were doing that in bulk from China. Prestige Biotech says they started this operation in Reedley after they acquired the assets of Universal Meditech, another company that owed Prestige and went out of business, and so Prestige took over. But neither company has a California address. Investigation has revealed claimed addresses that are either vacant or addresses in China that cannot be verified. Investigators and government officials say the lab is now closed, the mice are gone, the biological hazards are gone.
As of now,
there are no more biologicals, there are no more mice, but they still will see us abating. There's 30 freezers and fridges, there's medical equipment, there's all sorts of furniture in there. And so they'll still see some activity, nothing hazardous at this point.
But even if there is nothing to see now, there were quite a few things to see for quite some time of operation, apparently. So there remain quite a few important questions to consider. This company was producing medical tests, COVID tests, pregnancy tests, and more. One would assume they were selling these things. So who was buying? Are these products still on the market? Are these products still in healthcare facilities? Most importantly, are these products safe to use? And if they aren't, how does somebody even tell if they're using one, given the many untraceables about this company and its operation prior? And actually, how do we know that this one warehouse was the only source? Officials emphasize that this was a first and a one-of-a-kind discovery, at least in California.
We reach out to our local public health directors throughout the state, California, and nobody has really expressed this type of interaction with a unlicensed lab. So it is something new.
I've been in government for 25 years. I've never seen anything like this.
And I'm not even saying that they're lying. I'll take them at their word. We all know there are a lot of problems of which these people are completely oblivious. That's a given. But I'm just asking, is it reasonable to think that this was actually the only Chinese black market biolab of its kind on U.S. soil? Or is it more reasonable to think, hey, congratulations on scratching the surface, now keep digging? Because if this is anything more than just some one-off, that's a major problem. It's a major problem even if it is just some one-off, actually. But even if we're not so cynical as to believe this is some diabolical bioweapon operation, it is still extremely hazardous. Even if this operation really is nothing more than some Chinese agents trying to enter the U.S. medical market cheaply, just trying to make a buck and not actually trying to infect you, we aren't dealing with some cheap plastic toy factory here. We are dealing with dangerous pathogens and the biological engineering of both animals and viruses. And granted, I'm not usually one to be pounding the table for more regulation, but if you're asking me who I trust more between American regulators with at least a shoestring of accountability tied to American citizens or Chinese Frankenstein doctors, I'm taking American regulators. Although then I look at Dr. Fauci and I'm reminded the joke's on me, they're actually the same picture. But that's the best case scenario. Chinese agents not necessarily trying to be evil, but still dipping their hands in the AIDS jar and then in the herpes jar and then smudging those diseased fingers all over a product that you believe to be safe. Worst case scenario, this is actually the first discovery of a foreign enemy conducting biological warfare operations on our own soil, cooking up hazards to deploy at their utility, to weaken our society or stir up business for pharmaceutical companies, or potentially even to kill you. If that sounds too crazy or alarmist, well, I'll refer you to the trajectory of the last 3 years, of course, but what's crazier really? Defaulting to the worst case scenario as a given for the moral behavior of the Chinese government, or simply thinking, wow, I sure am glad that we caught the one and only illegal Chinese biolab in operation by the luck of a hose that wasn't up to code. That is clearly the end of that particular problem, so moving on. For now, it's best just to be safe and not take any COVID tests at all, because you might get sino-AIDS herpes if you do, but then again, that should be a given anyway, because if you're the sort of person who is still taking COVID tests, well, sorry, then it's definitely you who's the crazy one. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.